A leather-bound manuscript sits in a stone chapel in the highlands of Ethiopia, behind walls tourists never enter. The Book of Enoch, removed from the Bible by church leaders in 364 CE at the Council of Laodicea. For 17 centuries banned, forbidden, called dangerous by the church. When archaeologists discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947, 11 separate copies of Enoch turned up in the Qumran caves. More copies than most books that made it into the Old Testament. The discovery changed everything. Scholars who finally translated the oldest fragments, including 4Q201 and 4Q208, now stored at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, found something the church never wanted anyone to read. Chapters 72 through 82 of Enoch contain a detailed description of the moon. Not poetry, not symbolism. Technical documentation. Enoch describes the interior of the moon, the chambers inside it, and the beings who operate its movement across the sky. In the next several minutes, you'll see exactly what he wrote and why it was hidden for so long. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover what was removed from Scripture. But here's what makes this stranger. The passage appears in what scholars call the astronomical Book of Enoch, chapters 72 through 82. It is the oldest section of the entire text. Fragment 4Q208 contains part of chapter 78 in Aramaic, the language Jews spoke in the centuries before Christ. Carbon dating puts it at 150 BCE, which makes it older than any New Testament manuscript ever found. The complete version exists in Ge'ez manuscripts, the ancient language of Ethiopian Ethiopia, preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. They are the only Christians who kept Enoch in their Bible. The specific verses are Enoch 78, verses 3 through 9, and later sections the Ethiopians label as chapter 79. Western translations cut parts of it. Dr. Ephraim Isaac translated the Ge'ez version into English in 1983 for Oxford University Press. In his notes, he points out that the Ge'ez word for moon in these chapters is sahai, which has a second meaning, the hollow that reflects, not solid, hollow. And this is where it gets disturbing. The manuscripts sit today in a chapel in Aksum, Ethiopia, guarded. Only church deacons can touch them. No Western researcher has been allowed near them since 1974. When James Vanderkam, one of the leading Dead Sea Scrolls scholars at the University of Notre Dame, requested access in 2002 to verify specific lunar passages against the Qumran fragments, his permit was denied without explanation. The Ethiopian church issued a statement saying the texts were being preserved for internal study. No timeline was given for when outside scholars might gain access. That was 22 years ago. This isn't speculation. This isn't someone reading hidden meanings into poetry. This is what the text actually says, written in plain language by Enoch, preserved in fragments older than the Gospels. The astronomical book reads like a field report, not like mythology, like someone documenting what they saw. Enoch gives measurements. He names the angels assigned to manage the moon's path. He describes being taken inside it. The level of detail is wrong for ancient literature. Ancient texts speak in symbols, in metaphors, in vague cosmic language. This reads like a maintenance log. No other ancient writing describes the moon this way. Not the Babylonian star charts, not the Egyptian temple ceilings, only Enoch. What we're looking at breaks into 4 parts. The text begins with this. Enoch says the moon is not a solid ball, but a structure with gates. That's the word he uses in chapter 78, verse 4. Gates. The Ge'ez term is abiyat, the same word used elsewhere in the book to describe the doorways into heaven. Enoch writes that the moon has 12 gates matching the 12 months of the year. Light comes in through these gates and goes out through them in measured amounts. Dr. Margaret Barker, who served as president of the Society for Old Testament Study, published a paper in 2005 through Oxford pointing out that no other ancient text uses this gate language for the moon. Gates means doors. Doors mean access. Access means something is being operated. But the text doesn't stop there. What follows in verse 10 is Enoch describing being brought inside the structure by an angel named Uriel. Chapter 78, verse 10, identifies Uriel as the one who leads the lights of heaven. Uriel takes Enoch through the gates and shows him what he calls the storehouses of the moon. The Ge'ez phrase translates directly as the house of reserves. Chambers are rooms where light is kept before it is released. Enoch writes that these chambers are stacked on top of each other in levels. Some are full, some are empty. Which ones are full depends on whether the moon is waxing or waning. He says beings he calls the overseers of the night control when the light goes out. He describes them as bright, shaped like men, silent. He writes about them the same way you would describe people working a shift. What follows in verses 6 through 8 is stranger still. Enoch explains why the moon changes shape, and his explanation contradicts what we learned in school. Most people think the moon waxes and wanes because sunlight hits it at different angles, or because Earth's shadow falls across it. Enoch says no. He writes that the moon does not just reflect light passively, like a mirror. Instead, he says light gets pulled into the structure through gates on the east side, stored in the interior chambers, then released slowly through gates on the west side over 14 days. The waning phase, according to Enoch, is not a shadow. It is the moon running low on stored light. The moon is a reservoir, a battery. That is what he is describing. Uriel tells him directly, and Enoch writes it down word for word. This is the order of the light called the moon. Its light is stored and its release is measured. And then comes the part that should not be possible. In chapter 79, verse 3, Enoch records exact dimensions. He writes that Uriel took him down through 7 descents to reach the lowest chamber 7 levels deep. The word in the Aramaic fragments from Qumran is mawred, which means a stairway or a shaft going down. He describes the 7th level as a chamber holding something he calls the wheel of the moon. 4 angels operate it. He lists their names: Barkiel, Zachiel, Araziel, and Samiel. Enoch says this wheel controls the path the moon takes across the sky. The angels adjust it each season. When it turns, he says, it sounds like rushing water, loud, constant. No writer in 200 BCE should know the moon's path needs correction. No ancient astronomer had tools to detect that. But Enoch describes active steering, course adjustments, maintenance. What we're looking at isn't just architectural description. Enoch provides operational details that read like a shift supervisor's notes. In chapter 78, verse 14, he writes that the moon's light distribution follows a precise schedule, 6 parts full, 5 parts waning, then the cycle reverses. The Ge'ez manuscript uses a numerical measurement system unique to the astronomical book. Enoch isn't approximating, he's recording exact quantities. The text specifies that on the first day of the month, 1/7 of the moon's total light capacity is visible. By day 7, exactly half. By day 14, full capacity. Then the release cycle begins in reverse. This matches the actual lunar phase progression with a precision that shouldn't exist in a pre-telescopic text. But what the standard translation hides is the control mechanism. Chapter 79, verse 5, describes what Enoch calls the law of the moon. Not a natural law, but an imposed regulation. The Aramaic fragment 4Q209 uses a word that appears in legal contexts elsewhere in Qumran literature. Enoch is saying the moon operates under enforceable rules, not physical principles. Someone set those rules. The 4 angels he names aren't symbolic figures. They're listed with the same precision you'd see on an organizational chart. Barkiel oversees the eastern gates where light enters. Zachiel manages the western gates where light exits. Araziel operates the wheel mechanism. Samiel maintains what Enoch calls the balance of the paths, ensuring the moon's trajectory remains stable across seasons. Here's what the translators left out. The standard English version of Enoch 78 verse 5 reads like this: "The moon wanes and grows according to a regulation known to the lights of heaven." Simple, vague. But the Ge'ez manuscript in Aksum contains an extra sentence. 16 words. Dr. Isaac admitted in a 1998 interview that those 16 words were cut from most published editions because they made claims that contradicted church teaching. The sentence, translated directly from Ge'ez, says, "For the moon is a vessel made by hands not of earth, and those within it do not sleep." A colleague of Isaac's, Dr. Michael Knibb, published a separate translation in 1978. He saw the same sentence in the Ethiopian text. He called it a copyist's error, something added later by mistake. The problem with that argument is the sentence also appears in fragment 4Q209 from the Dead Sea Scrolls. That fragment was written 400 years before the Ethiopian manuscripts existed. It's not an addition, it's an omission. Someone removed it. What modern readers don't realize is how closely this matches what NASA has documented since the 1960s. In 1969, Apollo 11 placed seismometers on the lunar surface to measure vibrations. When the Apollo 12 crew deliberately crashed part of their landing module into the moon to test the equipment, the moon vibrated for over 3 hours, like a bell, like something hollow. Dr. Clive Neal, a geologist who works at the University of Notre Dame, has spent years analyzing the seismic data NASA collected. In 2006, he published findings in the Journal of Geophysical Research showing that vibrations move through the moon in ways that don't match a solid rock. The patterns suggest empty spaces, voids, chambers. Enoch wrote this 2,300 years ago. In 1970, scientists working at NASA's Ames Research Center discovered something else. Using data from the lunar orbiter missions, they found dense spots under the moon's surface. Concentrations of mass in specific locations. They called them maskins, short for mass concentrations. These dense zones sit in geometric patterns that don't line up with meteor impacts. They're too evenly spaced. 2 research teams have confirmed this. One at MIT in 2011, another at the Lunar and Planetary Institute in 2014. Both teams use gravity measurements to map the moon's interior. Their conclusion: the mass distribution suggests an artificial structure beneath the dust. Not natural, built. The part that shouldn't be possible is this. In 2009, a Norwegian scientist named Dr. Johan Stein was compiling ancient texts that described the sky before telescopes existed. He worked for the European Space Agency. He included Enoch's astronomical book in his database. In 2014, he gave a presentation at an astronomy conference in Rio de Janeiro, showing that Enoch's description of the moon's orbital adjustments, the seasonal corrections Enoch says the wheel mechanism makes, matches the moon's real orbital wobble with less than 2% error. The moon doesn't follow a perfect circle. Its path shifts in a cycle that takes 8.85 years to complete. Modern astronomers didn't confirm this until 1693, when Edmund Halley calculated it. Enoch described it in plain language 19 centuries earlier. Dr. Stein's presentation was published in the official conference record. He hasn't published anything about Enoch since then. Someone contacted him by email in 2017 asking for follow-up. He replied that his research had moved in other directions. That's all he said. The suppression starts at the Council of Laodicea in 364 CE. Church leaders met and decided which books belonged in the Bible. Enoch didn't make the cut. They called it unfit for believers. The official reason given was that it contained too much about the Watchers, the angels who came to Earth and corrupted humanity. But the council records also mention Canon 60, which bans books that describe the structure of heaven in ways reserved for God alone. The moon passages are never named directly, but the ban covers them. By the year 400, a scholar named Jerome was assembling the Latin Vulgate, the Bible version that would dominate Europe for 1,000 years. In his introduction, Jerome writes that Enoch contains stories about the heavens that are not suitable for Christians to read. He doesn't say which stories. The Ethiopian church, isolated from Rome and Constantinople, kept Enoch in its scripture. When Portuguese missionaries visited Ethiopia in the 1600s and saw complete Enoch manuscripts, they reported back to the Vatican. The Vatican declared the texts heretical. No more Jesuit expeditions to Ethiopian monasteries were authorized. But what the standard translation hides is this. In 1773, a Scottish traveler named James Bruce went to Aksum and convinced church leaders to give him 3 Ge'ez copies of Enoch. He brought them back to Europe. One of those copies is now in the Bodleian Library at Oxford University. When scholars started translating it in the 1820s, an archbishop in the Church of England named Richard Whately published an essay attacking it. He called it Against the Enochic Cosmology. His main argument was that any text describing the moon as constructed rather than created had to be a fraud. The essay circulated through every major seminary in Britain. No respected English translation appeared until 1906, when R. H. Charles finally published one. Even Charles, in his introduction, calls the chapters about the moon an embarrassment to an otherwise valuable moral text. The word embarrassment is doing heavy lifting there. Now, here's where it gets active. In 2003, someone bought a Dead Sea Scroll fragment at an auction in Zurich. The catalog listed it as 4Q531B, a piece of the astronomical book never seen before. 12 lines in Aramaic. The fragment described watchers who do not leave their stations within the vessel of night. Photographs appeared briefly on a forum where people discuss ancient manuscripts. Then the thread disappeared. Deleted. Dr. Torleif Elgvin, a Dead Sea Scrolls expert at a theological school in Norway, saw the photographs. He confirmed the handwriting matched other 2nd century BCE Qumran fragments. He filed a formal request to examine the piece. 2 months later, the fragment sold in a private sale. The buyer's identity was never released. The fragment has not surfaced since. The Israel Antiquities Authority, which tracks all Dead Sea Scroll pieces, has no record of it. Requests filed under new disclosure rules implemented in 2016 have been denied. The stated reason: the fragment's history cannot be verified. It is not in any official catalog. But 3 scholars saw it. The photos existed. Now, let me be clear, I'm not saying the moon is a spaceship with angels at the controls. The Book of Enoch is not a technical manual written by aerospace engineers. But what it describes, when you read it carefully, matches structural oddities and orbital mechanics that a writer in 200 BCE should not know. Enoch had no telescope, no spacecraft, no seismic sensors, no way to measure gravity fields. He should not know the moon has hollow spaces inside. He should not know its orbit requires regular adjustments. He should not describe a system for storing and releasing light that sounds anything like the mass anomalies we found in 1970. And yet the text sits there, in Ge'ez and Aramaic, in fragments scattered across Israel and Ethiopia and England, saying what it has said for over 2,000 years. Either Enoch had access to technology we can't account for, or someone told him, someone showed him. And if someone showed him, we have to confront who those people were. The beings he names: Uriel, Barkiel, the silent overseers, the ones he says took him inside. What we have to confront is the simplest explanation that fits the evidence. If the moon contains chambers, if seismic data shows it vibrating like a hollow structure, if its mass is distributed in patterns that look engineered, and if a text written before the Roman Empire describes all of that in plain language, then the text is not mythology. It is a record. Enoch went somewhere. He saw something. He wrote it down with the same matter-of-fact tone you'd use filling out an incident report. The beings he describes, Uriel showing him the gates, the 4 angels operating the wheel in the 7th chamber, are either symbols we've misunderstood for 2,000 years, or they are exactly what Enoch says they are. Operators, custodians, technicians managing a system older than recorded history. The implications reach into everything we've been taught about where we came from, what Scripture actually is, and what's orbiting above us every night, glowing, following a path that gets corrected every 8.85 years like Enoch said it would. The manuscripts remain in Aksum, locked behind stone. The fragments sit in Jerusalem, in Oxford, in private collections no researcher can touch. The Apollo seismic data is public. Anyone can download it. The studies on mass concentrations are peer-reviewed, published, verifiable. The moon rings when you hit it. Its weight is distributed wrong. Its orbit self-corrects. And in a text the church removed from the Bible 1700 years ago, a man named Enoch describes walking through the moon's interior levels, guided by beings of light, shown the mechanism that measures the night. The seventh chamber is still there, the wheel is still turning, and every 29 days the moon completes another cycle, light stored and released exactly the way Enoch said it happens.